Hello everyone, this is a call, and I am a somatic therapist. If you'd like to find out a little bit about my work, you can check out my website down below this video. So today, what I'm going to do is explain the 13th Nakshatra, which is called Hasta. And this is part of a series of videos that I'm doing on Kundalini Yoga and Astrology, but specifically the Nakshatras, which are essentially the lunar mansions in Vedic astrology. And how they interrelate through the Gunas. And the Gunas are the fundamental, attributes or properties that exist in all creation. And they exist in varying, ratios, but all creation has all three of these properties. So Hasta specifically is quite interesting to me. Hasta is... So I guess the best way to look at Hasta is to look at what came before it. So you had the two Falgunis. Now the two Falguni Nakshatras are essentially, they're generally described as being very creative, idealistic and creative. And so what essentially is happening in terms of the progression, because that's how we have to look at these Nakshatras, they're basically a progression, beginning all the way in Ashwini at number 1, which is sort of like the anxious energy of birth. You know, it's the beginning, it's the spring, all the way through till the very end, which is Revati. And Revati is all the way at the end of the final Nakshatra, and that's not death necessarily, it's more embryonic in nature. So what we have with Hasta is this energy where you can see we have on a base level this tamasic energy. And again, this is kind of like the impersonal mind. This is the level in which, to some degree, we may or may not be aware of, but this is very formative in terms of the life path that we take in life. And so this is very much about the material plane, but there's, a caveat I have to add to that, and I'll get to that in a moment. So on the secondary level, once again, we have tamasic energy. And again, tamasic energy just essentially means inertia. Another way to look at tamasic energy is, I tend to think about material focus. Tamasic energy as being a slower vibration. Think about a rock. A rock, you know, people like to think that it's not doing anything, it's not moving, it's not changing. The reality is that it is indeed changing. On a cellular level, it's still a vibration, very much like all creation. It's just that it's at a slower rate of vibration. So Rajasic energy is what's found on the tertiary level, or the level in which Yogi Bhajan would kind of point out as being water, which is what kind of flows out into life. So the combination of these energies, the best way to look at it is, what is the relationship between inertia and Rajasic energy, which is movement? So movement and attaching. So Rajasic energy in a lot of ways is kind of egoic. It's very positive, proactive, and attaching. So it's busy. So you've got inertia and busyness. You've got material focus and busy. So what we're looking at here is the moon. So the moon is the rulership of this particular sign. And that's the combination of tamas and rajas. So these two energies, when they come combination, why they say this is like the moon, is that the moon is this like, almost like it's a container for this like celestial energy, for the energy of the cosmos, so to speak. And then it reflects it upon the earth. So the sun, in a lot of ways, represents this cosmic energy which hits the moon, reflects onto the earth. So it's a solid body, an inert body, that ultimately creates motion and movement on the material plane. You know, you can think about the tides. The moon has the influence of the tides. A lot of the Vedic folks will say like the moon influences the sap in trees and all sorts of things. And you know, again, it kind of dominates liquids. So the combination of all these different energies is really fascinating, because what we're getting here is we're getting kinetic energy, or energy in motion, as it moves over solid mass, or again, over the material plane. So an active individual as he moves over over something solid, and what that creates is friction. Think about the process of erosion. Air, which seemingly has no mass, in reality does. Erosion over time by air is possible. Think about dunes, giant piles of sand which move and shift based on air currents. Not entirely, but mostly. So that's what's really interesting about this, is the idea that there's friction involved. So again, activity over a solid material is like friction. So there's 3 words that I'm going to associate with this particular nakshatra. The 3 words are self-reliant, which is great, but it also can translate as control, friction, which I talked about a little bit already, and adaptation. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go over the adaptation aspect first. So adaptation, the reason why we're saying that these individuals are very adaptive, well, you have to kind of look at the nature of Virgo. So Virgo is ruled by Mercury. So Mercury is a fast-moving planet, and it sits very, very close to the sun. So it's a bit of a conduit between the individual. Well, and again, looking at the archetypes here, the sun represents the sort of the bigger picture of the ego or the soul. Mercury is the intellect, which is sort of the pathway in some ways to the soul. So Mercury moves really fast, and a lot about Virgo is about learning to embody these divine energies so that we can idealize these things and then ultimately create matter out of those things. So it's ideas translated into form. So this Hasta is like the epitome of Virgo. It's a nakshatra that exists entirely within Virgo. So this idea of adaptation also comes from the fact when you look at what they call the padas. Now the padas are the 4, each nakshatra is separated into 4 parts, or padas. Each one of these padas has a planetary rulership. In this particular case, just so I don't get them out of order here, the first pada is ruled by Mercury, the second is Venus, the third is Mars, and then finally the 4th is the Moon. Now what's interesting about all these planets is that all of them are fast moving, and Mars being the slowest of the bunch, but nonetheless all these are very, very quick energies. So this nakshatra is really epitomized by fast adaptation and growth. So now fast adaptation and growth is great. Now the issue is how do we go about our process? So meaning, what level of awareness are we cultivating to then idealize these divine energies and project them out into the world? Well, there's 2 ways to do this. Either we focus strictly on the material plane, or we spiritualize ourselves on some level, which doesn't mean we turn our back on the material, but it means that the process that we're working towards ultimately is about self-realization, it's about self-awareness, so that then we can authentically express what we need to express outward onto the material plane. So the symbol here is the hand. So the hand is pretty interesting because it talks a little bit about what these people do, but also it talks about the representations of this nakshatra. So the hand, it's about busyness. It's about, think about our hands. Our hands are what we reach out into the world with. In some ways, they're the physical expression of our heart chakras. So the hands also, you have 4 fingers, well, the thumb, which we won't call a finger. We have 4 fingers, and those 4 fingers in this particular case are in reference to the 4, sort of primary motivations that all the nakshatras have. And that is kama, which is desire, artha, just so I don't get these messed up. So artha, is purposeful activity. Dharma, which is sort of your principles. and finally moksha, which is liberation. So Hasta, even though its predominant motivation is that of moksha or liberation, it also processes all four of those as well. The other interesting thing about the hands is that there's two. So Hasta, once again, we're looking at the two dualities here. The two dualities, which are push and pull. You can call it light and dark. But in this particular case, we're going to talk about attraction and repulsion. So attraction and repulsion. So Hasta is really, really interesting because something else about the four fingers is each one of the four fingers is divided into 3 segments. And 4 times 3 equals 12. There are 12 signs of the zodiac. So Hasta, according to most of my research, is where this divine energy becomes differentiated. So it literally encompasses all universal principles, and it is then expressed out and differentiated. So, and that's a bit confusing to kind of like unwrap here. So the differentiation happens through this Hasta's process. So I mentioned earlier that there's a lot of friction with this nakshatra. Now the friction, the best way to think about friction is pain, fear, and suffering. So pain, fear, and suffering are evolutionary tools for humanity, unfortunately. But that's just how it is. Unfortunately, this is how we evolve, is that we are challenged. Now, Hasta is really specially equipped, though, because it has a lot of power, a lot of prowess. It's a very powerful nakshatra that has a fair amount of energy. But again, these folks tend to be very self-reliant. And again, that's not, I don't mean that in the sense that it's negative. The self-reliance here means that these individuals are learning to cultivate their personal attributes, that which they can then project out into the world. So the friction rises because, again, we have a lot of fast-moving planets involved here. You've got Mercury, you've got the rulership of the moon, and you've all these padas, and then within the padas you have more fast-moving planets. So this is quick adaptation, quick growth. Now the problem is if self-awareness or one's attributes are not being cultivated, what ends up happening is disaster. So this sign is also epitomized by, disastrous consequences if self-awareness is not being cultivated. So what do I mean by disaster? I mean enemies, I mean poverty, I mean just any sort of nasty that can happen. It's all possible with this particular nakshatra. And that's why it's so very important for these individuals to learn what's authentic for them to express in this lifetime. The god, which is where a lot of this prowess comes from, this ability to kind of continue on and be persistent, is the sun. It's the sun god, or Savitar. I may be mispronouncing that. So Savitar is the sun god. It's creative energy and it's transformative energy. So think about what the sun does. The sun is well, you can make the argument, but I don't think there's any arguing really here, which is that the sun is ultimately the sort of trigger for creation on this planet. Everything in some way depends on the sun. So this solar energy, it causes growth and death. It's really, really very much the fuel for, generate, organize, destroy, or God on this particular plane, or specifically on this planet, Earth. So again, these folks, Hasta, epitomize this energy. Again, this god, Savitar, what it does is it provides, like I said, a great deal of fuel and power, which helps these individuals overcome the resistance. So Hasta, ultimately, even though they tend to deal with a great deal of friction and resistance and difficulties in life, they're also given a lot of skills and quick adaptation, and also to kind of think about, once again, this falls within Virgo, and Virgo is a mutable sign, which means adaptable on some level. So again, you have all this adaptable energy, these quick moving planets, and this solar energy to overcome resistance. So these individuals, at least on a practical level, can be seen out in life as using those hands. You know, again, you could think about artisans, people who create things and to build things. But also, on some level, these are counselors and people, because again, we're dealing with a lot of Mercury energy here. People who use their mind to a great extent, you know, so it's find a lot of counselors and things of that level, you know, psychologists, et cetera, et cetera. So these people also learn a lot about crises. So that's another reason why we're going to see them in careers in which they're helping others. So again, artisans and creative types, as well as those who are in social service. So now looking at projection 2, which is from Yogi Bhajan's book in the Mind, and I'm going to go over this in a minute, how I've come to the conclusion that projection 2 is associated with Hasta Nakshatra, is the Ombudsman, which I have no idea what that is, and I should have looked that up prior to this video. But the Ombudsman, this projection 2, the statement that Yogi Bhajan makes is how to deal with an accident. So once again, we're looking at this idea that these folks are sort of, you know, again, without the cultivation of self-awareness, they're sort of running into things. That Rajasic energy that exists on the level of what we're projecting out into life, that energy, it's, you know, it's not always necessarily self-aware, it's just kind of motivated. So again, a lot of mistakes have to happen, a lot of slamming into things has to happen in order for these folks and a lot of people with Rajasic energy to then go, oh, let me slow down and start to work on my choices. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and show you now how I made the connection between Hasta Nakshatra and projection 2. All right, so here we are, looking at Yogi Bhajan's book, The Mind. And this is the book that I use to make the connections between the lunar nakshatras and also Yogi Bhajan's projections. The other thing I should say about those nakshatras, once again, is that could apply to your ascendant, your sun, or your moon. So it's not just the moon that you would need to look at, it's also the sun and the ascendant. So how I found specifically projection 2 associated with Hasta is you follow the pathways here. So you've got tamasic energy to begin with, which associates with manas, or the mind. And so this exists on the level of the impersonal mind. So you can think about a deep subconscious urge here. And in the case of Hasta, this is material. And you keep following this down, and you get more tamasic energy. And then you continue to follow it. Positive energy, or proactive, or Rajasic. And that is number 2, projection 2, the Ombudsman, how to deal with an accident. Now, how you find this in the book is you find projection, the exercise for projection 2. And Yogi Bhajan gives you a little bit of an explanation as to what it's like when it's out of balance and when it's in balance. And this is the exercise, which is done for 11 to 31 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate this exercise for you now. All right, so projection 2, the Ombudsman. This is kind of an interesting exercise, and I think pretty appropriate for I guess this nakshatra, Hasta. And again, the idea here is with Hasta, it's about the hands. And these folks can do healer work, service work, again, be artisans working with their hands and things of that nature. So something kind of also interesting here is the idea of, I guess, how do we build up pranic energy so that we can move it through the hands? And so those of us who do like healing work like myself, But even those who do more kind of intellectual healing work, let's say psychologists, etc., the one thing is that there's a regular understanding about people of service that they tend to fatigue. And it's because we are constantly empathizing with those we're working on, or we're projecting a lot of our life force outside of ourselves. So this exercise can be used in order to cultivate energy at your navel point. And again, when I talk about the navel point, or what I'm actually talking about is down below the actual navel, about 2 fingers below the navel. It's the lower dantian. It would be another word for that area, or the hara would be another term. So what we're going to be doing here is, this is just a practice of long, deep breathing, which is unusual in this book because most of the exercises in this book tend to have mantra involved, things like that. So what we're going to do, though, is we're going to be using our mind and uniting the third eye point down with the navel point. And what this will do is it's going to build up warmth. It's going to build up pranic energy at that part of the body. And then what we're going to do in order to exhale is we're going to be pulling in that belt line. And what I suggest doing is pulling what Mula Bandha, or root lock. So what root lock is you're contracting your anus, your perineum, your genitals, and you're pulling in your belt line. And it's kind of like you're compressing that pranic charge, and you're allowing this sort of ball of warmth to build within the navel center. So the navel center is our body's center of gravity. It's our actual center of gravity. So what we're doing here is we're shifting our sort of energetic center of gravity. And another way to look at energy is it's a bit like fire. So that's why it tends to get warm when we put our awareness down there. So we're shifting our conditioned center of gravity. Again, our entire culture is about conditioning it up here through the intellect, and we're moving it down. And we're going into a feeling and sensing space, which is inside the body. And so what you should be sensing for when you're doing this exercise is a pulse, perhaps a spin, or heat. And I'm going to walk you all through this process. So the mudra is really interesting. It's very unique. So you're going to have your 2 fingers extended here, and these are your air fingers, or your Jupiter fingers, index fingers. And you're going to have your thumbnails facing your head. So you're going to be about eye level, about 6 to 8 inches apart, and about a foot out in front of the body. So again, a foot out in front, hands held at 6 to 8 inches apart, thumb tips or thumbnails facing you. The left finger, the tip of the finger, is at the level of the bottom knuckle on your right thumb. See, lots of details. So in this position, you're just going to hold this position, and you're going to breathe long and deep. Now the eyes, or the drishti, is really simple here. You're just looking straight forward. So locking straight forward, and you're breathing here. Again, the idea we're going to do is we're going to breathe through into the third eye point. And what I suggest you do here is right at the base of the nose, or the root of the nose. If you can, create a slight contraction or a pull sensation. And what you're going to do then is you're going to move your awareness, your sense of feeling, down the body towards your navel, and that's on the inhale. Once the air is held in, you're going to lift up your perineum and pull in the belt line gently. And you want to feel and sense inside the navel area, or specifically down below the navel. And again, pulse, spinning, heat, whatever it is you feel there. Once you feel something, you want to go ahead and continue pulling root lock, but now add the exhale. And as the belt line pulls in, you may notice heat and warmth rushing towards your hands. And that's the objective. There's actually this pressure that we're creating by moving pranic energy, this heat and warmth towards the hands. It can help release various energetic blocks along the way. So, once again, mudra, left finger lined up with the base of the right thumb, hands about a foot away from the body, 6 to 8 inches apart. Breathing, eyes directed forward, and I suggest finding a fixed point directly in front of you, and inhaling through the third eye point, down to the navel. Pull in your belt line, lift up the perineum, anus, contract genitals, and then when you're ready to exhale, once you feel something below the navel, continue pulling root lock, exhaling. And you should feel a flush of energy moving towards your hands and out through your extremities. So that's the essence of this exercise. The duration of time that's suggested is 11 to 31 minutes. And how you complete this exercise is through inhale, retaining the breath, and you're going to retain it for maybe 10, 20 seconds or longer. And then I also suggest exhaling and retaining out another 10 to 20 seconds. Then inhale, exhale, and relax. And then, as always, after you do any practice which requires a great deal of concentration and focus, what I suggest you do then is to go into kind of a deeply relaxing meditation. And what I mean by that is there's no point of focus, there's no concentration, there's no effort, there's no power being directed. It's simply open awareness. So with all that said, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I thank you for tuning in.